I hereby call to order the regular meeting of the Ojai Planning Commission for February 7th, 2024. Sherry, would you call roll, please?
Chair Quillisi? Chair Quillisi?
Sherry?
Sherry, your mic is off.
No. Chair Quillisi?
Oh, mic's off.
Mic is still off, Sherry.
It's on.
You just come in.
Sorry. Oh, James just figured it out. Chair Quillisi?
Mic is still off.
Oh.
Can't hear you.
We're working on it. Chair Quillisi?
There we go.
Here.
Vice Chair Trent?
Here.
Commissioner Murphy?
Here.
Commissioner Bennett absent and one vacancy.
Thank you. Commissioner Murphy, if you'll lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Do we need any changes to the agenda, Lucas?
No changes.
Okay. Then we'll move to public communications, the time set aside during the commission meeting for people to talk about items that are not on the published agenda. I don't have any speaker cards. Do we have anyone here present who wishes to speak on an item that is not on the agenda? Who?
This is an agenda item.
Okay, very good.
It's actually the applicant.
Please come forward, sir. Give us your name and tell us what you want to talk about.
Hi, good evening, planning commissioners. My name is Ben Harvey. I'm your new city manager. I just wanted to come down here to say hello. And you're in great hands. I'm not going to.
You're in
remain-
good hands as well with this staff.
I am. You're absolutely right. I'm not going to remain this evening, but I will be back here working. And of course, you know how to contact me. But thank you for all your efforts and your service. And I'm looking forward to the partnership. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, sir.
Yeah, nice meeting you. Thank you.
Sherry, anyone out there in TV land?
No.
All right. Then we will end public communications and go to our consent item, the minutes of the regular meeting of the Planning Commission, January 17th. Anyone have any corrections or changes to that? I had a little bit myself.
No, I didn't.
All right. This is on page 2, where it says questions for staff. We then had a motion by Vice Chair Trent to approve the annual review report, and that motion was passed. And it included asking staff to come back to a future agenda to consider modification of condition 27, which was the requirement for annual reports.
Your memory is better than mine.
I do remember that.
Yeah. So that was all that I would have suggested we add to the minutes.
With no other additions, I would move to accept the minutes as amended.
I'll second.
Very good. Any discussion? Then Sherry, let's call the roll on item 1, please.
Murphy?
Yes.
Trent?
Yes.
Quillisi?
Yes. All right, we'll go on to item 2, a design review permit and variance request at 1303 North Montgomery. Maura?
We need to do the
Oh,
ex
you're
parte
right, we do.
first.
Sorry. I seem to miss that about half the time. Disclosure of site visits and ex parte contacts. We actually have just one site tonight, 1303 North Montgomery.
And I have visited it, and I had no ex parte conversations.
Same. Visited the site. No ex parte contact.
Same here. It's a plate I walk by about 3 times a week. I've been interested to see the construction, have not yet spoken to anyone on the site about the case. So, sorry about that, everyone. Let's go on to item 2 then, the DRP and variance request.
Thank you, Chair Quillisi and Commissioners. This request is for approval of a design review permit and variance for an increase in the maximum allowable fence height from 4 feet to 6 feet within the front yard setback area of a parcel developed with a single-family residence and an ADU to secure a proposed private pool, and the property is located at 1303 North Montgomery Street. Pursuant to 10-2.804 of the Ojai Municipal Code, the front yard setback area for fences and walls is considered from the front property line to the nearest point of the wall of the primary structure. And pursuant to 10-2.805, the maximum height of a fence within this front yard area is 4 feet. And pursuant to section 9-2.08, every outdoor swimming pool is required to be completely surrounded by a fence or wall not less than 5 feet in height. Therefore, the purpose of this request, the DRP and variance, is to satisfy the height requirements for the required pool fencing due to its location. The variance is required, or a variance is required, when a proposed project has specific features that are outside of the boundaries of the zoning district's development standards, including structure height. A variance is a request for relief from those development standards to alleviate any unusual hardship to a particular property. If it's granted, it allows the owner to use the land in a manner that's otherwise not permitted. It's an exception to the rules. Pursuant to 10-2.2003, approval of a design review permit is required for all applications for construction of any structure that requires a variance. Hence, the design review permit along with this variance. Except for this variance request, a design review permit wouldn't be required for construction of a fence in an R01 zone. The project site is approximately 1.44 acres. The property received permits to develop an approximately 2,100 square feet single-story, single-family residence towards the rear of the lot, and a 562 square foot single-story ADU towards the front of the lot. The applicant now proposes to install a 15 feet by 35 feet swimming pool north of the ADU and surround it with a 6-foot-high wall and fence, which is within the front yard setback area of the site, because this is not the primary structure on the site. This is the ADU. As stated already, the municipal code requires that pools be completely surrounded by the security fence or wall not less than 5 feet. And the front yard setback area is limited to a 4 feet high fence. Ideally, the pool and required fence would be located in the buildable area to the rear of the main structure, primary structure, or in the side yard to the rear also of the main structure, where the height would be of a fence would be allowed to be 6 feet. In this case, however, the main residence is located approximately 35 feet from the rear lot line, leaving a narrow area for construction of a pool. Additionally, the rear portion of the parcel is sloped, and although staff doesn't consider the grade to be severe, the grading required to install a pool may be significant. So although lack of visibility is not a justification for approving a variance, I just want you to note that the proposed pool and security fence are proposed to be approximately 100 feet back from the front property line. The 6 feet high wall is stucco and transitions to a black 6 feet high metal fence for about 51 feet parallel to North Montgomery Street. The metal fence then transitions along the north property line and then traverses back south to complete an approximately 179 linear feet of required security fence for the pool just east of the ADU. The stucco wall is proposed to match the material and colors of the ADU, and the black fence transitions smoothly from that to finish the required surrounding security fence. Due to lack of buildable area, rear of the main residence, staff recommends the Planning Commission approve the requested design review permit and variance as proposed. And we do have the applicants here if you have any questions of me or the applicant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for staff?
No.
No.
No, I don't have any either. Very clear, a clear decision to be made here. Thank you very much. Let's hear from the applicant, Jane Carroll.
Good evening. I am the owner with my husband and my daughter of this property, which was bought as a family shared compound. We built the house at the top of the hill for ourselves, and she's built the ADU at the bottom. Not only does the hill go up and provide a lovely view for the house at the top, but the other problem is there are massive boulders at the top of the hill. I don't know if you saw them when you looked, but there are boulders this size. So the logical place for a pool was at the bottom of the hill. And we assumed that it was so far back from the street that wouldn't be a problem, but obviously I realise with the new pool ordinance it's against the code as it stands. It's been designed to be very well shielded from the street. There's a solid wall where you see it from the street, and then the fence goes through the oak trees there and will be hidden in the vegetation. And then we are planning to do planting at the front, so I think it will not be seen from the street or by the neighbours. So we hope that can be granted. Are there any questions?
Okay.
I drove by the property and kind of around to the side. Because of all of the construction, it was really hard to see much. But it did appear to me that you have complete privacy and that no neighbor will be affected in any way. So I have no problem with granting this request.
John?
No questions. It looks pretty clear cut to me.
I had just one question, and this perhaps is for staff. Looking at the drawing in attachment D, it shows a carport down by the ADU, and it shows what appears to be uncovered parking up by the primary residence. Does the carport meet the city's requirement for 2 covered parking spaces for the residents?
Yes, it does. That's the required parking.
Is there any required parking for the ADU?
There is not required parking for the ADU, and this parking satisfies the parking requirement for the single-family residence.
Very good, thank you. I have no questions then.
Thank
You
you.
very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
So, it's time for public comment, if there is any. Is there anyone? So I will open the public hearing. Is there anyone here present who wishes to speak on this agenda item? Sherry, anyone out there that wants to speak?
Nobody has their hand raised.
All right, well then we'll close the public hearing and come back to deliberations. Any thoughts?
No additional thoughts.
Okay,
No additional thoughts. I agree with staff. I think, there's not a whole lot of buildable area toward the rear of the residence, and seems like a logical place for it.
yeah. I have learned from past cases that our ability to observe is by driving along the street or walking along the street to look at the property. In case the owner was curious, we're not allowed to just wander around your property to see what's out there. But, yeah, I have no problem with this. The project, as I see it walking by, looks very good, and it's very reasonable to want to put the pool where the ground is flat or flatter, and there aren't any big boulders, so.
Most logical place.
Yep, seems like it to me. So if there's a motion,
Okay, I move that we accept the increase in, the that we give permission for the increase in the height of the fence from 4 to 6 feet, as requested in the DRP.
Okay, and the variance
And variance.
request.
And the variance, yes,
Okay.
and variance.
Okay, I'll second that.
All right, I have one suggestion. This is on attachment A, page 6. Project condition number 1. I want to be picky about these because resolutions I have to sign. I would suggest in paragraph, the first paragraph there, the first line, that we say swimming pool security wall and fence. Otherwise, the wall isn't approved, I think, by the plain language. So
Okay.
if you would be willing to accept wall and inserted in that sentence.
Yes.
Sure.
I do have a quick question.
Oh.
It says no lighting is proposed as part of the project. How can you have a pool and no lighting?
Lighting has not been requested as part of the project, and I'm going to quickly look through the conditions of approval. Yes, condition number 7, so if lighting were proposed, or if they were
Or subsequently
or
proposed.
subsequently proposed, the lighting shall comply with the municipal code, Title 10, Chapter 2, Article 16.5. So you're covered
Okay.
here in the conditions of approval.
No night swimming for a while.
Well, I think it's just the wall that's being proposed, not the
Just saying.
Very good.
Okay.
Call the question?
No, I'm good.
Sherry, let's call the roll on item 2.
Murphy,
Yes.
Trent,
Yes.
Quillisi.
Yes. Thank you. Work with staff. Lots of paper coming, I'm sure. All right, let's go on to item 3. A discussion item tonight about SB 9. And we have a new entry at the table. Lucas?
We do. If I could just take a brief moment of your time. To my right, and she'll be taking this seat and doing the presentation for SB 9 tonight, is Sarah Marshall. Sarah Marshall comes to us from Santa Barbara County, where she worked for a couple of years, but also went to school at UC Santa Cruz.
Very nice.
So she
Fighting
brings,
banana slugs?
Yes, they are
Whoa.
tough. They are tough.
she brings some experience, some exposure to the county role, and we're happy to have her here tonight. And she has worked. So her role, and Sarah can certainly correct me if I'm wrong here, but her role there was cannabis, and she worked on regulations for cannabis and process, and long range planning. So it was a combination of the two that she had been focused on there. And obviously, Santa Barbara County is much larger than what we've got going on here. So she was working on very specific and unique things. Here, she's wearing a couple of different hats. So.
And every little item is gonna be unique, because everything is different here in Ojai.
Yeah.
Starting tonight
But
with
welcome.
Yeah,
starting
happy to have
tonight
you.
with this item, SB 9. So.
Very good. Yeah, this is a tough one for first out of the gate.
And before Sarah starts, I'll just give her a precursor. This item was actually brought forward as an urgency item before City Council in 2021. And I want to say there was either 1 or 2 meetings that went before City Council. Ended up not getting the required 4/5 vote, which is a 4-1. Ended up going 3-2, which wasn't enough for it to move forward. So it was paused at that point. Recently, council has asked for that to be brought back and go through the full process. So because it's a matter that would be a part of the zoning code, Title 10, it comes before this body as a recommendation before moving forward for city council for determination. So with that, I'm going to switch seats here. There's some musical chairs here, and then she'll go through the PowerPoint.
Tee it up and share it. Yep.
All right.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Good evening.
Staff prepared a PowerPoint to introduce SB 9, Senate Bill 9.
Name and title?
Senate Bill 9.
Your name, your title.
My name is Sarah Marshall, Planning Aide with the City of Ojai.
There we go.
So in summary, Senate Bill 9 requires ministerial approval of either a 2-unit housing development, which includes 2 homes on a single-family residential parcel, or approval of an urban lot split, which includes a one-time subdivision of an existing single-family residential parcel into 2 parcels. The image shown on the screen gives an example of what that would look like, with the top 2 images showing that without a subdivision or urban lot split, there could be 2 detached single-family units or 1 2-family unit. The lower 4 images show that with a subdivision or an urban lot split, there could be 2 detached single-family units on each lot, meaning that the urban lot split is dividing 1 lot into 2. There could also be 1 single-family unit and 1 2-family unit. There's an option to have 2 2-family units and an option to have 2 single-family units.
Before she goes on to the next slide, I think it's important to note that the orange that you're seeing there is a shared wall in each of those examples, whereas the blue is showing independent units, freestanding independent units.
So where you have 4 blue units, that's 2 primary residences and 2 ADUs? Or,
I would preface not to call them ADUs and just call them units, because SB 9 is, and Sarah will go into this more, but SB 9 is in a different bucket than what we would traditionally see as ADUs.
still in 65852, but it's a different bucket therein?
Point 21, which has its own provisions, standards, examples, yeah.
Okay.
There is qualifying criteria for parcels that are affected by SB 9, primarily that it can only occur on a single-family residential zone property within urbanized areas, except any property that is considered to be an environmentally sensitive area, an environmental hazard area, a historic property and district, or properties where the Ellis Act was used to evict tenants in the last 15 years. So this SB 9 would only affect single-family residential zones within the city.
And does this mean that any request for a lot split on a single-family residential zoned property is now by definition an SB 9 transaction? Or are there other potential lot splits that are not SB 9?
Do you want to answer that?
So this is its own separate bucket. So if someone is going through an SB 9, there's feedback here, Sherry.
Sounds
So-
okay.
Try
Yeah,
that.
that sounds better. Okay, thank
Sorry.
you. So if they're going through that, it's a separate bucket. It's like an ADU. ADU fits only within its parameters. When we were doing tiny homes, it only fits within its parameters. A junior ADU only fits within specific parameters. This bucket, if you're going through that process, those standards are independent of really anything else that you're looking at, unless it's identified within that government code section or within the parameters that we're looking to build into this potential ordinance. Unless it's identified within that, then anything else that we're talking about is a separate bucket. If it becomes SB 9, it's something additionally would likely have to be deed restricted, meaning moving forward, if someone was to purchase the property or is it to be sold in the future, it would be specifically identified as, we haven't come up with a term yet, but SB 9 is the generic term that we're looking at this point.
So let's say that we have a 2-acre parcel in the
Wait, before we go into examples, you're wanting to talk about, can we get through the slide
Okay,
and the
okay.
slide deck, and then I know, and I can anticipate, and that's the whole reason why we're before the planning commission and why it's a
And it's a
discussion.
discussion item, not a
And not-
resolution.
Well, not a resolution within an ordinance attached to it,
Yeah.
is that we're working through some of these pieces. Some of these pieces are hard and fast per government code. Some of these pieces we can massage to a certain degree, and we can kind of sort that out as well. But let's have Sarah kind of finish this and wrap this up first.
Some of the other SB 9 summary requirements include approvals must be based only on objective standards and could not preclude construction of 2 units of less than 800 square feet each. Denials are only permitted if projects do not meet objective standards or if there are specific adverse impacts on public health and safety. And there are limitations on how jurisdictions regulate SB 9 projects, including setback and parking requirements and requirements that attached buildings must be allowed. This will hopefully provide more of an example of what this could look like, shown at the bottom of the screen. But for lots that are being subdivided, also known as urban lot splits, a homeowner can build 2 homes on each of the 2 new lots, allowing for a total of 4 units. If there are existing units, new homes can be added to the result in a maximum of 4 potential units. That is the most that would be allowed in either circumstance. Homes are subject to objective rules as long as the rules do not preclude 2 800 square foot units on each property. The example shown on the bottom of the screen is that if there's an empty lot and it's split into 2 lots, there could be 2 new homes on each for a total of 4 housing units. Or if there's a single family home existing on a lot that is then split into 2 lots, one lot could have the existing single family home plus a new unit, and the second lot could have 2 new units for a total of 4 housing units. Development standards for urban lot splits. Floor area, that can be no less than 800 square feet per unit. Density, there's a maximum of 2 units allowed per parcel. And lot size, the resulting lots must be at least 1,200 square feet, which means the lot to be split must be at least 2,400 square feet. The new parcel may not be smaller than 40% of the lot area of the original parcel. Additional development standards for urban lot splits. SB 9 does not include height limitations, but the city can set their own height limitations. No setbacks for existing structure in same location with same dimensions, or setbacks of up to 4 feet from side and rear lot lines. And for parking standards, the city can require off-street parking of up to 1 space per unit unless the unit is located within half mile of a high-quality transit corridor or within 1 block of a car share location, neither of which are located within the city of Ojai. SB 9 includes some anti-displacement provisions for urban lot splits. The proposed development shall meet certain requirements, including that the urban lot split would not require demolition or alteration of a housing unit. This includes a unit that is subject to a recorded covenant, ordinance, or law that restricts rent to affordable housing levels, a unit that's subject to rent or price controls, a unit that's been occupied by a tenant in the last 3 years, or a unit that was removed from the rental market under the Ellis Act within the last 15 years. There are similar development standards for a project that would be requesting ministerial design review under SB 9, the same floor area standards and density standards as an urban lot split. However, for lot size development standards, the ministerial design review provisions of SB 9 are silent as to lot size, meaning that the city could develop their own standards, correct? Yeah, so the city could develop their own lot size development standards for ministerial design review. Similarly, height, setbacks, and parking development standards are the same as urban lot split projects. And the only difference with the anti-displacement provision of SB 9 for ministerial design review is that the proposed development shall meet certain requirements, including that the ministerial design review does not demolish more than 25% of the existing exterior structural walls, unless allowed by the city. And it would not require demolition or alteration if a housing unit meets those 4 outline provisions similar to what you saw for urban lot splits. This tree may be difficult to view on the screen, but essentially it's showing that there are certain routes that could be taken for projects to fall under SB 9. I think it might only be showing this slide, but the text in green is showing that if an application is received for one new unit, it could be under, fall under an SB 9 type of development for a single family home if there's no density bonus requested and a hearing would not be permissible, and it would fall under ministerial review. Similarly, if the residential development application proposed multiple units in a single-family zone, it could fall under an SB 9 single duplex or a duplex and an ADU with no density bonus requested and no hearing with ministerial review. That concludes the end of the PowerPoint.
Can we go back to that?
The tree?
Yeah, the tree. This probably looks familiar to this group. Back in October, this is kind of how we opened up that 4.5, 5 hour discussion regarding all the different housing laws. Remember, we focused on the bottom portion
Yep.
with the SB 35 and SB 330 stuff. Now we're looking at the top portion, which focuses on single family units that are adding units consistent with SB 9 and other different factors that exist there. So the tree is really kind of filling in nicely because now we're talking about those pieces to the top and examples of how that would work. The interesting thing about this law, which really went into effect 3 years ago essentially, is that our hands are tied to a certain degree from a processing standpoint, ministerial only, which is it's a tough pill to swallow to a certain degree because anytime that you're doing subdivision, you would typically have that come before this body and then eventually go to city council as well. So that's not a process that exists here. If it falls into that lot split provision for SB 9, it's handled at staff level and we start checking boxes in terms of objective standards being met. Some of those standards have question marks by them, meaning there isn't a standard in which to follow. And that's where we could potentially fill in the gap. Sarah had mentioned some of those pieces, but they are objective standards in terms of what we're talking about. So any sort of wishy-washy language that doesn't include probably something mathematical in terms of how we would draw attention to saying a hard yes or a hard no in terms of meeting that standard probably will get thrown out by city attorney's office from a legal standpoint because it's just no longer legally defensible. So is there some wiggle room in terms of what we can do and the discussion and the examples that we can have? You know, we're open for a conversation, absolutely. But just recognize that some of these things, our hands are tied. And I know I've talked about that before in previous ordinances that we've looked at, and updated ADU law is one that we continue to see not open the book, but continue to be more strict and rigid in terms of what we have the ability to address. And I think if you've seen some recent stuff and examples of that with recent ADU law in terms of ADUs at second stories as an example from a design standpoint. Here, SB 9 as a lot split piece, we're open for a conversation and certainly some examples as I'm sure you guys have, as this commission has questions, and we can work through those.
Okay, should we go through all the questions for staff before we hear from the public? What would you recommend?
Let's hear from the public, because at that point, maybe that influences some of the questions that you have as well.
Okay,
That'd be good.
okay.
Cool.
Anyone here present who wishes to speak on this agenda item? I knew it.
We got two.
Well,
It's over there.
I'll take them in the order they came to me. First up, Bill Miley.
Wow, is it raining outside? First time I've used that umbrella in a long time. I read over the administrative report and the state law. My comments best represent what I read and remember. Defining state law and proposed local regulations is a challenge. I consider this law a doubled ADU law, twice what you can develop with an ADU with limitations. I don't like the intent of SB 9, as its full application can wreck the purpose of single-family zoning, but that's an academic issue, and I've registered my objection. Questions of fact I am uncertain of. Maybe I better. A, the size of a new lot in a single-family zone split, minimum of 1,200 square feet with no maximum. That's what I read. That's very small, 25 by 50. Most residential lots are at least 10,000. B, state law says 800 square feet minimum for a second primary building. That's also small. I'm familiar with 1920 craftsman cottages with 2 bedrooms and 1 bath, which are about 900 square feet. This proposal to limit the size to 800 square feet is small, considering up to 4-person household. 1,000 square feet, I suggest. C, state ADO law and our ordinance sets a maximum house size of 1,200 square feet. Thus, the ADU can be bigger than the primary house. D, I'm confused. Our term sheet seems to restrict the second primary from having an ADU or junior ADU, question mark. E, state law prevents affordable housing units. Whoops. 9, another idea. Our term sheets consider limiting new houses to very low and low affordable rents. I disagree. Such low rents, income rents, require angel investors or outside government funding. No one will build such units knowing they're going to lose money forever. F, land trusts or nonprofit corporations might consider affordable rents. I like the 40-foot setback. Requiring 30-foot parking setback on a 1,200 square foot new parcel seems very difficult. Residential lot size would seem to be a factor in deciding the size of a secondary, primary, and ADU structure. The larger the second parcel, the larger the buildings. And last, I'd like to limit to 16 vertical feet for building height. Intrusion into neighbors' yards from a second story and properties is the social community dynamic, and we should limit that. Keep it to 16 feet, no more. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. And I have a card from Larry Steingold.
Good evening. Larry Steingold, Pleasant Avenue resident. This is a loss of sovereignty. When this occurred, it also took SB 9 and SB 10. And our state rep and state senator did not vote for either one of them. Okay, they just didn't
Neither
vote.
for nor against?
They didn't vote, they ducked the vote, or for some other reason weren't available. Okay, couldn't vote for it, couldn't vote against it. I mean, it's a loss of sovereignty from the cities, all of them. How come the cities haven't gotten together? You guys, I mean, I know you're the planning, okay, that's that part of it. But as a practical problem, all these houses are gonna be on their own sole sovereign lot, an APU, right? They're gonna have separate ownership, cross easements, separate utilities, separate water lines, separate sewer lines, separate no gas lines, sorry. Or maybe not. If they don't have a septic, now, for example, in the Arbolata, how far are the septic systems supposed to be apart for those houses? Because that's obviously a prime target for this. You take a 3-acre parcel, and they can throw up 4 houses. 3 other houses, all of a sudden you took a $3 million parcel, turned it into a $7 million parcel. But you have no sewer. So how close can you get? All right, so that's gonna be an issue. So you're gonna get the pro-sewer people, and you're gonna get the anti-sewer people and the anti-development people, because you can quadruple the number of the homes in the Arbolata where the numbers work. But I guess planning is going to work, maybe turn it into a historical area, an architectural historical area, or something innovative. But like, for example, in my neighborhood, we have a house behind us, I think it's a ½ acre. They have 2 properties on it. That can now be turned into another 2, correct? Right, all right, so you get that right, all right. It's just gonna take more homes and more years, and that'll fine. So, thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Anyone else here present who wishes to speak on agenda item number 3? Sherry, anyone outside?
Nope.
All right. Then we will close the public hearing and go back to discussion and I think perhaps a few questions for staff.
I noticed that in the staff report, sewer connections are addressed, and that we could require new developments under SB 9 to be connected to a sewer. So I think that's a very logical thing that we should recommend.
Okay?
You want to stay on sewers, or do you want to go all over?
I'm all over sewers, as you know. The thing that concerns me, not that I'm all in favor of having everybody on sewer instead of septic systems. But if there were a single lot in the middle of the Arbolata that wanted to do this, it would not be financially feasible for anyone except Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos
To do it.
to get to the nearest sewer. So it's a good thought, my opinion, but it may not be practical. It
Well,
might be something that is strongly recommended, but I'm not sure that requiring it would be financially fair in some cases.
In my opinion, if you have an Arbolata lot that's in the middle, they just lose the right to increase the septic usage on that lot.
Well, there may be county environmental health division rules that preclude it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, that,
I don't
because
either.
they do their own judgments on these things. I'm just saying, that's something to think about, is
Yes.
the location of the parcels with respect to the sewer is something I think that we need to take into consideration. That's all.
I wouldn't have a big problem in denying them the ability
Okay.
to do that unless they're Jeff Bezos and can afford it.
In which case, they won't care.
And Judy, you're saying require them to have a connection to sewer?
Yes, not allow increased septic sewage in a given lot.
Right.
I mean, because it sounds like they can multiply by 4 what's already being put
Something
in
we could
to
do?
the septic tank, and that doesn't seem to be working out real well as it stands.
Well,
Right.
there are probably rules within the city already
We could even do that.
that if you did a lot split, you'd have to have a second leach field, if nothing else, and a second septic tank, but I don't know.
I think it draws itself to capacity. So anytime that you're increasing the number of faucets, the number of toilets, restrooms, for that matter, it's a capacity piece, and that's a math piece, and that's something that is a regional discussion as well.
I have
And
to
I
say, I don't know
recall-
where that is in the code.
It's
Probably in Title
It's-
IX
It's
somewhere.
living in Title IX, so it's living more in the building world, which is ministerial, so it's pretty hard and fast. You meet these things, you meet them, and you can move forward. One of them I remember because we were looking at doing that for a piece of property that had septic, and they were looking at expansion, and it was with their ADU. And what ended up happening is when it was the regional board, I think it was LA County Regional Board, required,
Water Quality Control Board?
yes,
Yeah, okay.
sorry, that's the full name, required an annual report be done, and that report equated to about 25K, is what we were getting in terms of estimates. And it wasn't something the city was doing, it was something that was being pushed onto the property owner. So they opted instead to connect to sewer, which was a much cheaper version in the long run. So there are options. It would almost behoove it to give those options, and the reality is that both are going to be expensive. I wouldn't necessarily say it to the point of financially infeasible, because there's likelihood that something like this, in terms of the number of units, could then facilitate a discussion with property owners along that same line to say, will you also help in the burden of this expansion, whether it be for sewer versus septic. So both of them, I think, really logically are on the table from a discussion standpoint, and probably could be baked into the code. Financially speaking, they're probably, one probably is more than the other. I'm just not sure which it is, to be fair, given a lot of unknown circumstances.
Well, I can speak with some authority on this. I've been a director of the sanitary district for 6 years now, almost. And I recall a case out on the west side of town where a property owner wanted to connect to sewer, okay? The nearest sewer main was some distance away. So that property owner put up the front money to extend the sewer to where that property could be connected with just a lateral. And there are, by the sanitary district's calculations, 9 other properties that could potentially connect to that same piece of sewer once constructed, once extended. The sanitary district is not allowed to extend the sewer system. You have to put it in and then deed it to the district, just like a developer has to put in streets and curbs and gutters and all that stuff and then deed it to the city for maintenance. But at that time, and this is 5 or 6 years ago anyway, they had to trench up Kuyama Road from 5 Points, 500 feet. At the time, that cost was $100 a foot. I'm sure it's 2 or 3 times that now. But they also set up an escrow account so that if any of the other 9 potential connectors to that piece, they would put in 1/10 of the cost of that extension, and the original parcel owner would get that back out of the escrow account, so that if it was ever fully subscribed, then everyone would have paid an equal share to get on sewer, on that piece of sewer. And that sounds fine to me. But it is also, by sanitary district regulations, every dwelling unit that you add new, not by conversion of an existing structure, adds 1 capacity charge to the system, and that's currently running about $16,000 a unit. So doing a lot split and putting more houses wherever, whether we call them ADUs or not, and I'll get back to that, it's not an inexpensive proposition. John, did you have questions?
Yeah. Well, a couple just general questions. To get your recommendations on your term sheet for review, did you research other cities? Yes?
Yes, I researched and looked at the city of Ventura, county of Ventura, city of Oxnard, city of Camarillo. So far, it was just the city of Camarillo and the county of Ventura that have other SB 9 examples published on their webpage of how they're processing these applications.
You haven't looked at outside of Ventura County, though?
Yeah, primarily just Ventura County.
Beyond that, those are the areas that I had asked staff to really kind of focus in on, because those are kind of the localized areas.
Sure.
Being in the planning network that I've been in for as many years as I've been doing this, I've also reached out to cities that also have planners that I've worked with in other cities. And what we're finding, oddly enough, in the last 2 to 3 years, that there are not a lot of SB 9 lot splits that have taken place. There's been lots of inquiries like what we've had. I think we've had probably 5 to 7 inquiries, and really only one application that we currently have in that's looking to meet all of the rigid standards of the SB 9 lot split parameters. One of the pieces that we haven't talked about and wasn't in the presentation and it was on purpose, has to do with the financial side. Financially, when you're actually taking what is a lot that financially has a mortgage tied to it, and you're turning it into 2 lots, and you're adding units to it, where from the county standpoint, certainly it's being reassessed, but how is that being addressed from a mortgage standpoint? And in having conversations with some of those planners in other cities and jurisdictions, what they're finding is that the financial institutions are not willing to address these additional units. So if you are on mortgage, it's difficult. Some would say impossible at this point. I'm sure that'll change sometime in the future, but for right now, if you're on mortgage, it's difficult, if not impossible, to have an SB 9 lot split actually go through and pass the muster through financial. Now, if you're free and clear, that's a completely different story, because all you're doing is paying taxes at that point. You're going to be reassessed regardless.
It's raining.
So yeah, I wondered what that was.
If there's a mortgage on the big lot, though, when you split it, then how is the bank protected? Does it now have 2 mortgages?
That's the challenge.
No, you could
The
have
bank
2.
is saying, no, this is one lot.
Yeah,
And that's
a
I
risk.
had a fairly interesting conversation with a planner in Glendora on this very point, because it seemed like in the beginning, when this government code first came forward, the planner there told me that they had like a dozen that came forward. And every single one of them, because they were all on mortgage, they didn't own it free and clear, came back and said, hey, you guys didn't tell us that the banks were going to have an issue with this. And of course, we have no control over that. But it was an educational piece from his standpoint, and then obviously he shared it with the group from our standpoint. And that's when it became apparent that there's a reason why we're not getting a lot of these, is because they're reaching out and they're finding out that there is a challenge there. And I would say across the board along the county, for Ventura County, I have quarterly meetings with the other directors, and everybody's saying the same thing at this point. While we have parameters and we have standards in place, and we're open to the discussion from a ministerial standpoint, there are very few that are going through, and the reason being is if you're not free and clear, it's difficult. And also, from what we're finding, is the educational piece in terms of understanding the SB 9 process is not simple. And a lot of the times when we're having conversations, and I know I've had conversations with other directors in Ventura County, these individuals that come in, they want us to process it. We review the information. Planning reviews, community development reviews the information. We don't give them the roadmap. They've got to understand how that roadmap works. And unfortunately, the government code doesn't give a clear roadmap. It just gives some fairly strict, rigid parameters, objective standards in which to follow.
It's, yeah, I've read both the government code sections, 66.411.7 and 65.852.21, and they seem to be full of standards you must or you must not, as the case may be, but it's not clear how to get through the maze.
Yeah.
But I have kind of I like to think of it at least as a higher level question. If someone came in to the city and said, I would like to do a lot split, how would you know, is that an SB 9 lot split or is it a plain old lot split? Are there any other lot splits now that this SB 9 is in law? Are there any other lot splits that are not SB 9 lot splits?
Yes. Through the subdivision.
So how do you tell one from another?
The difference is the square footage. With the SB 9, they typically come in and they identify, hey, I'm curious about this SB 9 lot split. How does this work from a ministerial standpoint? So we point them to the government code section. We provide them with the application that's required for this. And they start down the road of, okay, if I do a lot split, this lot split, what's the minimum square footage that I can use? Mm-hmm. And that's when I turn to them and say, well, staff does as well. You're no longer looking at the minimum dimensions in terms of the lot itself. You're looking at the minimum square footage. Mm-hmm. And the square footage is 1,200 square feet. That is the base in which to work from.
Hard to figure out how you'd put two 800 square foot structures on a 1,200 square foot lot, but.
So that.
You go up.
Yeah,
that's how you do
up.
it.
But there's no height.
But you've got height limitations in your term sheet as well.
But that's
Term sheet,
that's city,
but
that's
not
city imposed,
In
not
law, yeah.
state.
Yeah.
There is no regulations in terms of height, aside from what's already,
That might be characterized as a local rule that prevents building structures
yeah.
in a way that's allowed by SB 9.
Or
And if it prohibits building those structures, I think SB 9 says you can't do that.
Right.
well,
So-
or it adheres to our current code, right?
Well, as we've learned about housing law over the last couple of years,
But SB 9
what's in our
follows.
code doesn't matter.
Well, SB 9 says that it has to follow objective standards in the code.
Objective standards, yes.
So likely we would fall into the height limitations for that specific zone.
Right.
I haven't had a two-story proposal at this point, but likely if they were to use the minimum standard of 1,200 square feet in terms of lot size, at 800 square feet in terms of what they'd be looking at for a minimum, you'd be looking at a two-story structure at that point. If they wanted to do two.
Two-story, 16-foot tall structure.
Well,
16
that's-
feet is something that's proposed
That's
on the
proposed.
term sheet,
I
but that's not
understand.
something that's
But
built
that's
into
my
the.
second question is, can we have a stricter guideline here for SB 9 qualifying projects versus what's in our code?
From a height standpoint, I believe you can. And here's why. Let me just unpack it for you just for a minute. Sarah, you can jump in as well. But okay, so 1,200 square feet is the floor,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody that comes in asking the question is going to say, okay, I'm only going to do 1,200 square feet. It really is dictated by what's already existing on the ground in terms of what buildings are already on the ground in terms of
1,200 has
main.
to be at least 40% of the original lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's
starters.
the 40% rule, which is the hard and fast.
Yep.
I mean, in terms of the one application that we have in, we kind of have like a checklist essentially for what they have done, what they haven't done, what they need to do per state law. The height limitation isn't something that we're tracking at this point, aside from making sure that it's within the current zoning's regulations. And that's an objective standard, and I think that more than likely, I think Thais will agree with me, would hold up in terms of a standard that we could use hard and fast. So 1,200 square feet's the floor, right? So then you start looking at some other parameters in terms of the 40% rule versus distances from
Setbacks.
from, yeah, and the distances meaning setbacks from side and rear and front yard areas. And also access. Is this a corner lot? Is this an internal lot? How are you gaining access? And then we start looking at easements in terms of access. So all those things are on the table and swirling around in this kind of discussion to address those standards. That is how SB 9 lives currently. If we're talking about the Subdivision Map Act, it's pretty rigid. When you go through the process and you want to subdivide within a specific zone, you have to meet specific dimensions in terms of width and length and lot coverage, or lot square footage, actually.
SMA also is restricted to a minimum of 5 parcels, isn't it?
Parcel maps can be up to 4, and once you hit 5, it turns into something referred to as a tract map. And tract maps are 5 and more. There is no limit to a tract map.
And
But
both
parcel
are okay
maps-
under SMA?
Say that again?
And both 4 or less, say 2 to 4, and 5 or more, are both within the parameters of the Subdivision Map Act?
Correct. Yes. And the stringent rule for that is it becomes discretionary. So if we're talking about SB 9 living within the ministerial standpoint, that is something that this commission and council won't see, aside from the regulations that we're looking at addressing from an ordinance standpoint. However, within the Subdivision Map Act, if you're doing a parcel, like a lot split through the Subdivision Map Act that is not SB 9, then you're open for it being subjective in terms of how we're reviewing it, ensuring that they're meeting the minimum standards of our code, and only our code, and obviously addressing some of the government code regulations that exist within the Subdivision Map Act. But really, we're focused on a completely different book, a completely different standard by which to address those proposed development.
I have to say, as Sarah Marshall knows, I asked a lot of questions about this one, and they're hard questions. All of this is hard to understand. But
Yeah, this isn't simple.
a couple of different times, she made a statement in responses to my questions that ADU law is separate from SB 9. Okay. And you made that point in the presentation. Those 4 little boxes that were occupying 2 parcels, they're not ADUs. They're something else. They're SB 9 units. Okay. But I come back to my original question. If someone comes in and says, I want to do a lot split, is it an SB 9 lot split, or is it some other kind of lot split? And how do you tell one from another?
It really depends on the proposal, on the development that they're proposing. More than likely, if someone's...
Are there criteria that say if you're doing a lot split with these parameters, then the lot split itself is subject to SB 9 or is not subject to SB 9? Or are we talking about somebody coming in and saying, I want to do a lot split and I want to develop the 2 resultant lots? Do those things have to happen at the same time for it to be subject to SB 9?
Absolutely, because there has to be a document recorded as a part of this to address it as an SB 9 lot split versus a Subdivision Map Act split, whether it's 2 or up to 4 or 5 or more. that's not something it's potentially deed restricted through CCNRs, but deed restricted from an SB 9 standpoint, we characterize it as SB 9. So for future sales and purposes, if it's ever obviously these properties will change hands eventually. It's known that someone down the road 30, 40 years from now can't come, unless the laws have changed. Let's say the laws haven't changed, hypothetically.
Never happened.
Haven't changed. Then you are living in the bucket of SB 9 and those standards that exist hard and fast. Now, obviously, those standards could change over time, but you would still be living within that bucket of what the SB 9 regulations and objective standards identify. In addition to anything that ends up coming out of the standards that we develop.
Okay, so we had a case earlier tonight up on North Montgomery. Parallel road is Daly, and there are a couple of very large lots that are empty, like 100 by 250 or 100 by
Vacant
300,
lots?
I'm not sure. Vacant lots.
Vacant lots.
Okay, so if an owner of one of those lots came to the city and said, I'd like to break this up into 2 or 3 lots,
The lot split.
that's a lot split. If it's 3 lots, then it's clearly SMA, it's not SB 9. But if they said, I want to break this into 2 lots, okay, of, say it's 100 by 250, that's 25,000 square feet, right? 25,000, okay, let's say. I want to break it into 2 12.5 thousand square foot lots, okay? Is that an SB 9 split, or is that some other kind of split?
They would need
How
to,
do you tell?
they would need to identify that.
Well, that brings up a question. With
How would
SB
they
9
know to say?
But with SB 9, don't you have to have a single-family home on one of the, you have
It
to
can
have
be-
it existing already, right?
It can be vacant. There's a
A
vacant
vacant
option as well.
home, but you can't have a vacant lot and say it's SB 9 if you don't plan to build on it and just do a lot split. Don't you have to have some sort of
I
proposal?
don't think so. Thais, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, you can split a vacant lot under SB 9. There's no
But
development
don't you have to have a
that's.
planned development for that
You don't have
site?
to.
You don't have to.
And that's why what Lucas is saying is important, that the deed to the split lot identifies it as SB 9 in some way, so in the future,
So it's
Or
on
not.
somebody
SB.
wants to build it, it wants to build on
So they're
the 2
restricted by
lots,
SB
they
9.
have to follow the SB 9.
Oh, got it. No wonder you're not
But-
getting a whole lot of applicants.
But if I had one of those big lots, and I came in and said, I want to split it into 2 lots, why would I want to do it under SB 9 as opposed to the Subdivision Map Act?
Because you don't have to go through the planning commission.
Don't have to come to the planning
It's
commission.
ministerial.
Ministerial.
Well, yeah, but
No,
you're,
Yeah,
gets-
but
you're so
boy.
limited on what you can do with SB 9.
Yeah, it's a,
Yeah.
you get
It's
some
a
good
give and
things
take.
It's a give and take.
back, some back.
Right. There's pros and cons to both of those processes. And I'm not going to sit here and say which are the pros and the
No, no,
cons, but you know what I'm getting at. Like, the SB 9 offers a ministerial review process, all handled through staff, all objective. We're checking boxes, we're doing math. Whereas if you're living in the Subdivision Map Act box, where it's subjective and there's a lot of process and review, but you have the potential for more units, right?
Well, all the
That's a
housing
different-
laws say we have to be objective, not subjective.
Correct. Yes.
So,
Affordable housing.
Affordable housing. Not, if you just wanted to do a single.
not any
family.
old housing, okay?
Correct. Yeah, your 2-story piece is still well in for single-family homes new. That is protected at the moment. So that is protected. The separating of these lots, we're not talking about like turning it into 4 lots. We're talking about taking 1 and turning it into 2. And then the rigid of it is challenging. That's probably why state came in and said the minimum can be 1,200 square feet. They probably looked at San Francisco or Sacramento, some larger city and said, shoot, some of these lots could be 1,200 square feet, and you could fit an 800 square foot house on it, and
trying
put
to
it 3
maximize.
stories, and suddenly we've got something addressed here. There was parking on the first floor and the second and third, or whatever. But I have a feeling that they're looking at larger cities and not necessarily thinking about the smaller cities. Regardless, those standards are across the board statewide.
Yeah.
So
And how many, what is our housing stock with single family? It's the majority, correct?
yeah, I mean, in terms of percentage,
Yeah,
yeah, it's like 80,
70, 80%?
85.
So 80% of our housing
85%.
stock is single family residential.
I don't have the exact percentages, but we're majority single family. Even the multifamily zones that we have here and the mixed use zones that we have also allow for single family. And you've seen some of those examples in previous meetings where, oh, geez, look at this. There's single family surroundings. How is this even possible? It's like, well, it's allowed.
Yeah.
We allow it.
Yeah.
For our
So,
code.
yeah, so a developer who had a bunch of cash could just come in, buy one of those lots and split it and then build 4 homes. Potentially.
And that was the discussion that council had a few years back, and that was one of the concerns. I will admit, in our staff report, we identify the affordability component.
Mm-hmm.
We've had legal look at that closer recently, and I don't see a path forward for us to deed restrict it as affordable. I think we are in for a challenge in losing.
Now, is there a way that we could put in some requirement that whoever is applying for the SB 9 has to live on the property?
Yes,
It's in there already.
It's in there
Yes.
already?
that's correct. That can be deed restricted.
Well,
That we
it's
can
in
do.
the code that if you have a JADU, you have to live on the
Yeah.
property.
Right.
Correct, and that's deed restricted as well.
Okay, so that would prevent that developer just coming in and they'd have to live there for a while.
They would have to live there.
They might not like that.
Well, what it creates is a finite of how serious are you about
Correct.
this property.
Right, yeah.
Right.
It's not an investment at that point.
Well, it still could be an
Well,
investment. It's just a
longer
different-
term, yeah.
It's just
It's a
you're going to be
little-
staying there.
Yeah, you're gonna be staying there.
So.
Okay, that's good.
There's a lot to unpack with this.
There is.
If you have more questions, we are open. We
Yeah,
are
and-
open to
and-
book.
and
We may
obvious-
not necessarily have answers to all of them. I'm hogging most of the mic. I don't necessarily want to hog most of the mic.
But I do like the rationale that you have in here around fire safety and around requiring, the units to be separated by 10 feet, because it is a little bit more restrictive than what we have in our code, which is, I think, great, because we do have fire issues that we need to address. And if we have a bunch of units all crammed together, then that's a hazard. So I think having this sort of concept makes a lot of sense. So even though it's a little more restrictive than our code, there's reasoning behind it. Does that make, you know what I mean?
No, I agree 100%.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's good.
And the way in which that operates is if it's 2 units, it's 10 feet. But if the units are combined, it's 10 feet around the entire perimeter of that building. So,
Where does SB 9 say that? I remember that as a response to one of my questions, because it said the units have to be separated by 10 feet
Oh,
or have a
that's
firewall.
proposed. That's
No,
proposed.
not in the term sheet,
Oh,
in the law.
when the law is there, okay, I didn't see that.
I
no,
didn't see it in the law.
I apologize. I didn't see it in the law when I was reviewing it again today, so that might have
Okay,
been
so
an
that
error on
was just-
staff's part.
That's a staff suggestion.
Correct.
Yeah,
Okay,
I like that.
That's a suggestion up for conversation.
all right.
Now, the first one that you have, the 1 hour rated firewall, is that building code? Like, that's not planning. Isn't it in the building code?
I think 1 hour firewall is required for garages, that separation requirement. I think that's where that was
It's like
pulled
the BAB
from.
though, right? That's, isn't that Title IX?
That is Title IX, yes. Yes.
But I'm just wondering, can we say that we can require certain building, adjustments, I guess? to
The
how
government
building-
code hasn't said that we can't.
Okay, I got you.
So this is one of those where we have some squishy opportunities here to firm up some. And remember, it's a math piece. So here, we're talking about a 1 hour firewall that then more than likely, we would then turn it back to the building code and identify what specific section so that it's to something that's not subjective, but very objective in terms of a hard and fast standard.
Right, got it, okay.
There's no 1 hour firewall required between a JADU and a primary residence at the moment, correct?
Mm-mm. Not that I'm aware of.
But if
No?
I did a lot split and one of the resultant structures was actually two pieces together, existing, then I've got to put in a 1 hour firewall somehow in the middle of the structure to separate the two units, the two SB9 units?
The challenge that I have with that is, so we have two things. We have the 40% rule. We have the 40% rule.
That's on lot square footage.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then we also have the minimum square footage. Now, there isn't a government code section that I've seen written here currently that says that you can't chop a building in half, essentially, and have to require some sort of separation. So I would assume that you could do that and then make a unit out of the new lot that you're creating. So that would end up being one unit and using
Or one structure with two units in it.
right, correct. One
Then you
structure
need that
with two
firewall.
units, and you would need that firewall.
According to this suggested provision.
Yes. Thais, are you aware of a provision that would restrict a lot line for the SB9 from basically taking a building and chopping it in half? Because every example that I've seen and every conversation that I've had with other planning and legal teams is that it typically is, oh, here's this building, oh, and then here's this other building. I haven't seen an example where it's like, oh, and this example is chopping a building directly in half or parceling off a building 70-30.
There is in 65852.21, there is a restriction that the proposed housing development under SB9 does not allow the demolition of more than 25% of the existing exterior structural walls.
Okay.
So that would be the wall.
That may not come into play
Yeah.
if you're just carving out part of the structure. But if one of the picture examples you had was two little blue units on one of the new parcels and a duplex on the other parcel. If the duplex is a new build, does it have to have a firewall down the middle of it? Is that a requirement of SB9? Is it a suggested requirement by the city or something else? I don't.
It's not required.
SB9 does not require any fire standards per se.
Well,
but it
I'm all in
allows the
favor of them,
city
don't get me
to-
wrong.
It allows the city to require or to create objective standards for the SB9 units. So that's one of the standards that staff came up with, the fire.
I will say this though, so we're talking SB9 and that's kind of the bubble that we're living in. From a building code standpoint, I would ask the question of the building official about that very question that you just brought up. And that's something we can bring back, I think, at a later date to get that clarified. Because I have a feeling that building is going to say, no, there needs to be some sort of a separation between those two units. No different.
Because it's SB9?
No, because it's two units that are sharing a wall. I just have this.
Like a JADU and a primary residence?
No, but a JADU is different. And the reason why a JADU is different because you can share sanitation facilities. So you don't necessarily have. A JADU is a little bit more unique
It's like a condo.
in the factions that exist there. You're going to correct me on something?
Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
On the question of whether the two units can be connected, the two new or one old, one new SB9 unit, same code section 65852.21 says an application shall not be rejected solely because it proposes adjacent or connected structures. If the structures meet building code safety standards.
Ah, so there we go. We'll get you some detail on
What
that.
are those?
We can get you detail. I don't have those at my fingertips
Okay.
tonight, but we can get that information.
All right.
That'd be interesting.
Back to the same top level, if I came in and said, I want a lot split, and you'd say, well, do you want a lot split under SMA, or do you want a lot split under SB 9? And I would say to you, how do I know? I just want to make 2 lots.
Mm-hmm.
Where do I wind up? What set of laws do I wind up subject to? Or do I have to make a choice that I want to do a lot split under SMA, or I want to do a lot split under SB 9?
It's interesting that, Chair Colossi, it's interesting that you bring that up because there have been several calls that we've received since this law came on board, saying, well, why don't I just go through the MAP Act and I'll just go through that.
Yeah.
So we walk them through that process, and they're like, okay, so then what if I do an SB 9? And then we walk them through that process, and we're like, okay, so based on these 2 processes, where do you want to move forward?
In each case?
Yeah, so they see the restrictions, and the process for each of those, and then they've got to figure out which to move forward on. We don't make that decision for them. We provide them with the information, and then it's up to them, that applicant, to figure out whether they want to go in this direction or they want to go in this direction. And what we found at least up to this point, with the exception of one application that's come in and we're processing currently, is that they choose this road, which is neither. They hold off, recognizing that there are challenges here and recognizing that there are potential challenges here.
You're saying they took a middle road. What's that?
And the middle road is not doing anything.
This is-
Oh, not
this is
doing anything.
Waiting till the land
Not doing a
appreciates
lot
and then
split.
sell it.
And out of those, I said there was probably in between 5 and 7. I think that's a fair assessment. We're a small city. And I would also say that in talking with other jurisdictions, with the exception of maybe Oxnard and Ventura, the city of Ventura, they've had more inquiries, but are coming up with about the same result.
Still
which is-
mostly people saying, I don't like either of those choices.
Well, I think really what it is the SB 9 restrictions that exist currently. That's the challenge. It sounds very lucrative to go from 1 to 4, but the process
May not be easy.
is not simple.
Well,
Now, I got a question on let's see, page 3. Looks like bullet point number, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
attachment A, page 3.
Yeah, number 5. Consider whether to direct staff to consider researching return to planning commission.
Attachment A, page 3?
I'm sorry, page 3
Oh,
on the
staff report.
staff report.
Okay.
Consider whether direct researching return to planning commission with a summary for consideration. Inclusionary housing ordinance provision, is that what you're proposing?
No,
Or is that something
inclusionary
different?
housing is kind of a wild card. I threw it out there, but I kind of want to retract it.
Okay.
It's not something council had asked for, and I don't want us to go down the road of talking about what inclusionary housing is, the process,
Okay.
because that's almost another discussion, and I haven't received direction from council to dive into that, so.
I do like the last bullet, require heightened fire mitigation standards. I would also say that we could potentially include gray water capture requirements, to help with impermeable driveway, parking structures, so the rain can get through the ground.
Does that sound like an objective standard?
It depends on how it's written, but if we can create exact parameters that anybody, The test is if anybody can read the standard and understand it the same way, everybody understands it the same way, that's objective.
Yeah.
So if we
Well,
can
we could
do
have
that,
stormwater
then-
collection, there's gotta be some stormwater collection
There's
strategies.
absolutely some math that I think we can plug in there. At least,
think so.
at least throw it out there and say, hey, we're thinking this.
Yeah. And
Let's
here's
see if
why.
it meets the test.
Yeah.
and
We've
go
got
from
drought
there.
issues, well, not right now, but potentially in the future.
It's gonna come back around. It's
It will
cyclical.
come back around, 100%.
Is non-combustible an objective standard?
I mean, you could probably test that.
I think so, but I
Certain
also
degree.
think
That's that
these,
1 hour thing.
Sounds like an ASTM kind of discussion.
these standards, I think the building official can look and see what he thinks is.
Maybe non-combustible per this standard. Government, I mean, it seems like it would be a building code standard
Mhm.
from a non-combustible standpoint, which is a hard and fast. We can come back with what that would
Something
look
in
like.
NFPA, I'm sure.
Yeah, look,
The building official probably has some kind of mathematical, scientific way to explain non-combustible that.
yeah, it can't be something that a reasonable person couldn't look at and say, it's this. If I look at it, and then I have Thais look at it, and we have two different determinations, I mean, there's been court cases that have come out that very clearly show that. I can't think of the city that recently had that happen where they lost, but it was based on that. It was based on a height piece, if I recall correctly. I don't remember the city off the top of my head.
It was a transition. The code just says there can't be, or there shall be a transition in height between buildings. And the court said
Means if there's
transition
two buildings,
is
they have to
to-
be different heights?
they have, there must be a transition, so the city read that as there's a 1-story building, 2-story building, 3-story building, and that's
Mhm.
okay, that's a transition.
Mhm.
But the court said that's too subjective, because a transition can be multiple things. It
Few
can be a
feet.
building.
It could
It
be
can be
1
a
stories
trailer.
versus 4 stories, and that's a
Yeah.
transition. It's too subjective.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Could be 1 story 25 feet tall.
Right.
And 1 story 16 feet tall.
Yeah.
And that is math at that point. You're looking at height and a very specific number. That's objective. You
And-
must meet this standard.
And I wanted to bring up what Bill had mentioned about the 10,000 square foot minimum. Is that something that we can put in here, or is it, does the law say it's gotta be 1,200 square feet minimum?
Okay, so in terms of the SB
Actual lot.
9 subdivision,
Yeah.
the lot can be a minimum of 1,200 square feet.
So that's
We
the law.
cannot,
Can't say 10,000.
correct,
Got it.
Okay.
Okay.
correct. We could come in and say it can be a minimum of 800 square feet, right? But we cannot come in and say it's a minimum of 5,000 square feet or anything more than 1,200,
Got it. I see.
unless the government code changes.
Because that's
How often
more
does,
flexible than the state law.
Yeah. Okay.
how often do they change these codes and standards? Is it a yearly thing? Are
Well, for
we-
SB 9, I don't think there's been any changes to SB 9 law since it was adopted.
That's been 2 years and a couple of months now.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I can't say the same thing is true for density bonus law or for ADU law. It took 24 years for ADU law to catch up to where it's at today. Same thing is true with density bonus law. This is in its infant stages.
Yeah.
I think right now, I get the sense that the state is probably collecting a lot of data
Yeah.
and then probably gonna spit something out in the
They
future.
can get to a point where the banks can figure out the ownership of that.
That seems to be the biggest hurdle at this
Yeah,
point.
that's-
That's what we keep hearing.
I could see how banks would say, no way,
It's still,
mortgages for this size property. Like, that's the real estate that you own.
Correct.
What happens to this next? I mean, you're going to take this conversation back, and then what are you going to do with it?
Excellent question. Sarah and I are going to take your information combined with the comments that we have in the staff report and some of the term sheet pieces. If there's any of those pieces in the term sheet that you're thinking don't make any sense
Yeah.
or just don't seem like they are Ojai, in the sense of the kind of what we were kind of spitballing, then let us know. Cross them out. And then we're going to be turning this into a draft ordinance with a resolution coming forward.
Will it
But
come
also
back here?
responding, yes. As a part of this process, because it's a change to Title 10, this body provides a recommendation that's then forwarded to City Council. And that recommendation is through a draft resolution that then has either a more finited term sheet that kind of reads like an ordinance, or a draft ordinance in its own right for this body to review.
Cool.
Chair Colossi, you had your hand in the air on something that you were, I'm
Yes,
assuming,
well-
saying yay or nay to on.
Just ask some questions. And I'm a little confused on the term sheet. I have a staff report here. I have attachment A, standards term sheet, okay. But it's much shorter in some places than the provisions called out in the staff report. For example, staff report, page 2, 1, 2, 3, fourth bullet under objective standards says a height limit of 16 feet for any new SB9 dwelling unit. Okay? Now, if we're in a single-family residential zone, right now the code says, before we do the lot split, let's say there's an existing house on the lot, and we want to break it up and have 4 houses, all right? That existing house can be 25 feet tall. Actually, with architectural features, it can be 30 feet tall. But the other 3 structures now have to be 16 feet tall? That seems odd. And I'm curious as to the rationale for suggesting that as part of an ordinance.
A lot of the units that are single family in Ojai are single story.
Yes, agreed.
Maintaining that is something that staff was exploring. You know, driving the neighborhoods, you don't really see a lot of like projection towards the street for a lot of the lots throughout the city. There are ones, obviously, they've come before this body, and there was ones that are currently existing. But keeping a low profile was kind of the reason for projecting the 16-foot rule. Now, if someone comes in and they want to do a SB9 lot subdivision, and let's say that rule was in the books for us, and they said, all right, so I'm doing 1,200 square feet because that's the 40% rule for SB9, and I'm living within the SB9 box, and that's how I'm going to be operating from an objective standpoint, ministerial. And they say, I'm doing 2 units. Staff, those 2 units have to be 800 square feet as a minimum each, right?
And as a
And my
maximum, according to the term sheet.
And my response is, yes, as a maximum. That's what we're proposing moving forward as a recommendation, is the 800 square feet. But you're giving me a height limitation of 16 feet. And my response to them would be, can you make the 2 units fit into a 16-foot high building where you box it up? Maybe. Probably not. You probably have to sink the first floor a little bit, which is going to cost you. So there's going to be a financial piece to it. So that could create some challenges. So the 16-foot, while it's aggressive, I do kind of question whether or not that could then turn into a challenge as to the, the adequacy and the effectiveness.
But I do like the nature of it. I mean, you're sticking with the general plan and the concept of, you know, protecting our natural environment and our views and all that.
Right. While I'm not saying that, that is really what we're trying to do, is maintain the low profile of the community.
And that's following the general plan.
It is.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling that government code would probably, and future development may say otherwise. So,
And we'd have to change this again.
right.
Do you have a sense, if you drive around or walk around the city, there are a lot of single-family, single-story homes with a 312 or 412 pitch on the roof. Does that fit within a 16-foot height?
Yeah, 16 foot is taken from the top. Now, what you could do, from a height measurement standpoint, you could call 16 feet from the eaves and not from the pitch of from the top of from the ridge, I guess you could call it. You can be specific, and I'll ask Thais if I'm going in a direction that still is objective. Yeah, she's giving me the thumbs up. So by doing that,
You could do 2 stories.
there you go. You could still get away with that and keep that low profile and not go what would be perceived as a full 2 stories. Probably 1.5 stories is probably what it would end up working out to be. I mean, some of the older homes, they end up doing dormers because they're building out their attics. So
We've had cases like that here.
sure. These are all hypothetical scenarios.
I understand.
Okay.
But if we're going to ask you to come back with some sort of a draft ordinance, then I think we need to kind of get into the details of what's gonna be in there.
You know what would be probably helpful with some of this is we've got Sarah here to help out with this, is to put together maybe some hypothetical scenarios as to what it would look like if you were to take a height from the eave, say, versus the ridge, or have a fully boxed building at 16 or 18 or 20 feet, and what that looks like from a scale standpoint.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's examples in the city right now. I can think of a couple that are close by here that would give some context to what we're
Great.
talking about here, right?
Yeah.
So,
A lot of sense. It'd be awesome. Yeah, have some examples.
yeah.
You have, on that same page, the next bullet down, a maximum size limit of 800 square feet for a new SB9 unit. Okay, so if we have a lot and there's, say, a 1,500 or 1,600 square foot, not a large house, but say 1,500 square foot house, and they do a lot split, then the other 3 structures that result all have to be exactly 800 square feet. That's a maximum, and it's also a minimum. It seems to me that's gonna make for some odd-looking neighborhoods.
Potentially, yeah.
And I'm curious about the rationale behind setting 800 as a maximum at the same time that the state law says it's a minimum. And I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but I'm trying to understand where that came from.
I think what we're trying to do is to put a limit on that unit. It doesn't necessarily have to be a box, a rectangle. It can have some architectural. Yeah, it can have some architectural interest to it for sure. L-shaped or whatever ends up being, depending on the lot in which it's fitting on, right? I think that says a lot about what we're looking at here. I think what we were trying to address is a size concern. Now, the size concern could very well be dictated by how they end up, breaking up that SB9 lot split. But here, I think our recommendation at this point, at least from a discussion standpoint, is 800 is the hard and fast rule.
I'm okay with that. I mean, you also have to think about,
To Chair Quillisi's point, though, are you just asking the question, or is there a concern that you have in terms of allowing for potentially larger units?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I mean, our first apartment was 600 square feet, and we lived in it as a couple with no children. But 800 doesn't fit very well, except for childless couples. And I don't know how many of those we have, or how that would restrict what gets built in the city and what kind of people wind up living here as a result.
Well, we could come back with what a floor plan would look like as a typical floor plan for 800
What's
square feet.
A 20 by 40 swimming pool.
Yeah,
That's the space you have. Yeah,
There-
you can change the shape a little, but 800 square feet is a mighty small house.
Sure.
What is that compared to a tiny house?
tiny house is half
Tiny
that.
house could be a quarter of that.
Yeah. At maximum, it's half that, but a minimum of like 280 square feet is what they look for.
Okay.
So,
Seems to me that one of the early Becker proposals had very small.
let's make sure we're not mentioning specific
That's a
examples.
proposal that
Thank
we
you.
talked about.
Hypotheticals, I keep
That one.
going back to that.
I mean, those units were all very small, the ones on South Montgomery.
Mhm.
And the ones up here, they could be 500 or 600. But, okay. There was something in here, I'm trying to remember where it was exactly, saying if you had parking, it had to be at least 30 feet, 20 or 30 feet from the side of the property?
40 feet from the parcel line. Oh, it's gotta be back.
Doesn't
I think
say-
it was-
Doesn't
I think-
say in back.
I think it was more side, and I'll admit, when we were,
And if you've got a 50 by 150 lot, that's already much larger than we're talking about. That's 7,500 square feet. And how do you get how do you get 40 feet from either side of that? That space just disappeared. There is no parking.
yeah, so we were looking at a specific neighborhood for that, and it doesn't fit the context of what you just mentioned.
Yeah, even a 100-foot wide lot, that says you've got to park in the middle 20 feet of the lot?
So basically, the parking would always have to be in the middle. Yeah,
Mhm.
it puts a pretty.
Very
I don't think that
narrow.
holds up. To be fair, it was a suggestion, but it was
Yeah,
also a
it-
suggestion recognizing the larger lot atmosphere.
And I'm not critical of staff, I'm just
No,
saying, we got to keep track here and not ask the impossible
Right.
of people.
So we recognize that. Actually, Sarah brought it to my attention, and she said, the hypothetical is like, it overlaps almost in some of these smaller lots. And I said, okay, so that's something we're going to have to immediately adjust. So, yeah, recognizing that, and thank you for that point.
Okay, on page 3, third bullet down, deed restriction limiting new residences built under SB 9 to be affordable housing. So anything that gets built under SB 9 has to be affordable? That's the intent of this?
Yeah, and
Okay, and secondly, affordable for low or very low,
right.
but not extremely low and not moderate.
So I'll just stop you there. We've done a deeper dive, and we can't regulate that.
Mm.
It was a suggestion, but after doing further analysis and review,
You just have to go with something small that's affordable by design,
Yeah.
that term.
okay? I like the fire separation distance.
Yeah, I like that too.
I'm not sure how you manage that. 10 feet between structures and 4 feet from side or back property lines is slightly closer than is allowed normally, I think, under the code, isn't it? It's 5 feet right now, and this is saying 4 feet, just to make it more possible to put structures in if someone chose this route.
Right. That's the idea.
Okay.
Woodward Panhandle.
Require heightened fire mitigation standards, okay. We already have fire hardening suggestions from people like the Fire Safe Council and the Fire Department and the Fire Protection District. Can we do more in there? I'm not sure.
We can take a look at those.
Or do all of those things just automatically occur?
Not automatically. Right. So we can take a look at those, and within that building section where we're building in that conversation that we were talking about earlier in terms of the fire separation wall, that 1 hour fire separation wall, we can certainly look at other fire hardening parameters that could potentially fit the mold, and do that in like a bullet format.
Okay,
Not necessarily putting them within the ordinance themselves, but having them live outside the ordinance to have that conversation to see which ones do fit that and which ones don't.
okay. Back to the first bullet on page 2, a solid 1 hour rated firewall between any SB 9 unit and the primary dwelling unit or ADU. So that makes it clear an SB 9 unit is not an ADU.
Right.
And that's reinforced in various places. ADU law is not the same as SB 9. But if you get a lot split under SB 9, and you're starting with just one structure on the property, and you put a second one on this side of the property and 2 more on that side, all 4 of those structures are SB 9 units, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the original primary dwelling unit then has to be outfitted with a 1 hour firewall.
They're connected?
Between any SB 9, but the primary dwelling unit is an SB 9 unit.
If it's new.
I'm sorry?
If it's new.
Newly created.
Newly created. Remember, if we're creating a new lot,
So on the second piece of the lot that gets 2 units, they both have to have 1 hour firewalls, at least on the side facing the other unit? Or is it?
if they have a shared wall.
Not what
So
it
for
says.
instance, well, we can clean that up, but the idea with this is if it's one solid building, 2 units, 1 firewall.
One solid new building.
Correct. So this is one solid new building, firewall. This is the simplicity of it, right?
Okay,
Versus 2 separate buildings, there is no firewall requirement at that point.
Distance?
Yeah, where would
Oh, yeah, they have to be 10 feet apart, don't they?
They have to be
Distance
10
would be
feet
your-
apart,
but there is
but
that
if they are
10-foot
10
rule.
feet apart, then you don't need the firewall?
Oh, I see what you're
Remember,
getting
we
at.
started with a primary dwelling. and
Right.
We added an SB 9 unit on the same half parcel, let's
Mhm.
call it. Does that new SB 9 unit have to have a firewall if it's 10 feet apart?
The firewall, and we can clarify this, the idea is the firewall will be required if the units are combined and they have a shared wall. If they're separated,
Not if they're
then the
10 feet
1 hour
apart.
firewall is out and the 10-foot separation
Good, I like that
is in
clarity.
play. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we still need to work on the parking. I don't know what to do there.
Well, we can require, the requirement is 1 parking space per unit, correct?
That makes sense, I
Why?
like that.
One
I-
parking space per unit,
Per
but
unit.
40 feet from the side property lines.
Right, we can work on that. I think the distance piece only works on larger lots.
Yeah.
And to be fair, the one application we have in is not a larger lot, so,
Probably ought not to apply to any lot.
right,
Most driveways are along one side of the lot
yeah.
as built or as proposed, I would
Now,
think.
SB 9 doesn't identify whether that parking space can be covered or not. And I think there's wiggle room in there to require that, either as a garage or as a carport, right?
So if somebody came in and
Wrong?
said, I want to do a lot split under SB 9, they potentially could avoid coming before this body because it's now ministerial. They could also potentially not have to have covered parking?
Yeah, there's not a requirement for the covered parking. It's just one parking space. It doesn't say one covered parking space. It just says one parking space.
It says off-street parking. Does that mean?
That means it's gotta be on
It's
private
on the
property.
property,
Yep.
definitely
Okay,
on,
but-
yeah.
Okay, so
But
it can be
anywhere on the
uncovered.
property presumably.
Yep. One off-street to me does not mean that it's that it's on the private property and that it's covered. There is no covered provision that's identified.
Covered is separate from off-street.
Yep.
I agree.
Yeah. So I think there's wiggle room in there. It doesn't say that we shall not, because there are provisions in other regulations of government code that say we shall not do this. Like we shall not have covered parking. It's pretty clear. This one's not.
Well,
Okay.
and I would apologize for getting down in the weeds, but if you're coming back with something written, I think we should explore every one of these things so you don't write something that we have to ask questions about the next time we see something from you, that's all.
Well, to be fair, I expect questions the next time we come back.
And I,
Experience
sure you will,
would
yeah.
indicate that.
and I apologize, I wanna go back to the wall, the 1 hour rated firewall and the new dwelling unit. So in the first bullet, you said a solid 1 hour rated wall to be required between any SB 9 unit and the primary dwelling. So is that SB 9 unit that you're talking about a new dwelling? And then your second bullet says new dwelling units are required to be separated by 10 feet. So how does that work?
So if the new units are independent, then there's a 10-foot buffer.
That I understand. So we need to
And then
clarify.
that 1 hour and we can clarify that, I agree with you.
Okay.
It's not,
Yeah.
it wasn't meant to be written hard and
I
fast.
get it.
To a certain
Yeah.
degree.
No.
We were kind of throwing stuff at the wall and saying, let's see what sticks.
I get the intent of it, but it just wasn't clear.
Yeah, it's well intended here. I think understanding some of the context and the community concerns. So if the units are one building, then we're looking at that as the 10-foot buffer around the building
Got it.
with the firewall.
Got it.
Firewall goes away with two separate buildings,
That are at
but the
least 10 feet
10-foot
apart.
buffer remains.
Right.
Now, we probably should clarify, is it a 10-foot buffer for each, or can the 10-foot buffers overlap? Meaning the structure shall not be any closer than 10 feet.
Separation from another dwelling unit is
Yeah.
sufficient.
We can,
That's
yeah,
a
we
single
can clean,
10-foot space.
we can clean that up, yes.
The nature of it is for help for fire, to stop the spread of the fire from hopping around to different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Um,
10 feet between structures.
25-foot panhandle for flag lot. So what is that? What's that one, if you could elaborate a little bit? I mean, the flag, that's the bottom piece of the parcel.
That's the pole, that's the
Right, that's the
flag
pole.
pole.
So it's
And
gotta be,
actually, I think the fire department says they want 27-foot wide access
okay,
to the back. I remember we had a case some years ago where someone wanted to take an existing lot that had one house on it and put a driveway along one edge and
Oh.
put two more lots in
okay,
the back.
okay,
And the fire department said, that's okay as long as that driveway is at least 27 feet wide,
right,
so that we can get in, turn around, and get out again.
right.
And so I wondered about that, 25 versus 27. I don't know, I have a flag lot next door to me, but I haven't measured how wide that is. And there in fact is a very nice oak tree right in the middle of it,
Yep.
just like over here on Blanche.
Look, we're blessed with a lot of mature oak trees in the
Yeah, we
city.
do.
Yeah.
It's a question that I probably would have to pose to fire department, because I'm sure they're getting lots of questions as it relates to SB 9 specific lot splits. And I wonder if they have their own provisions to address that from a fire safety standpoint. So
That would
We'll
be,
put
that would
that-
be helpful to know.
we'll put that in the report coming back.
Another question I have just in general, and I don't think it's covered here. We talk about will serve letters from local utilities. Okay. I personally, at the moment, have a call into the Casitas Water District folks. I have not had a call back yet. But in general, I think when you get a will serve letter, it's effectively saying, yes, there's a water main in your neighborhood and we can hook up your house. The general standard for residential use is a half acre foot per year. But the requirements under NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, document number 1, says depending on the kind of structure you're talking about and the size of the structure you're talking about, the requirements for water for fire suppression are very different. They're defined in terms of gallons per minute out of a fire hydrant and for what period of time. But it's things like 1,000 gallons per minute for an hour or 2 hours for a house or a warehouse, or, I mean, it could be, for a big warehouse, it's a much bigger number. And if you don't have that, then you have to put sprinklers in, at least according to NFPA document 1. I'm wondering, are we covering that here? We're talking about a bunch of little 800 square foot units. Do they have to be sprinklered now?
New units would have to be sprinkled, yes.
And they have to have solar too, right?
Solar is a requirement, yes.
Solar's a requirement?
State.
Yeah, gray water is not a requirement that I know of. It's not in the plumbing code yet.
No, but we might be able to do something for that in here.
Yeah, we need to think about how much of the interior structure of a home is really in the planning commission's purview, and how much of it is in the city building officials' purview.
Well, it sounds like we're kind of mixing.
Well,
up this.
we're doing a lot of that, I agree.
Well, I think some of it we're getting clarification, which may not have to be something baked in, and some of it we may have within our wheelhouse.
Or if there are other standards in Title IX or somewhere, then they're going to apply anyway.
Right.
But I think it would be helpful to us to get a fuller picture of what are these 800 square foot units gonna look like?
I think you might bring
so-
back examples,
Yeah.
potential examples.
I think we can do that, yeah.
And what kind of parameters are we talking about? And the sewer district by itself is a whole separate question
All of them are gonna be
that the
halfway.
city doesn't get into, except to the extent that it designates a dwelling unit as an ADU. And we've made it very clear tonight that SB 9 units are not ADUs.
They are SB 9 units.
They're something else.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's in its own bucket.
According to this, there'll be 2 stories, 16-foot high, buried halfway in the ground. Parking will be right in the middle of it,
Under it.
Under it, yeah, it goes in the
All
basement.
reasonable.
All reasonable.
And then the rainfall will fill
The rainfall, yeah.
sunken
Yeah.
garage.
So we have a rain garden right next to it. There's all kinds of things that we're looking at doing here.
Little
Yes.
squalls or swalls or what they're called.
Okay.
Okay.
I would suggest looking at that 25-foot wide panhandle, because I think the fire department's looking for more than that.
Yeah. If they
Still
are-
objective, but different.
Right, right. Objective.
Right.
Right.
Consistent with the surrounding area is still kind of squishy.
It's way too squishy.
Yeah. Protection for oak trees or designated, it should be oak trees or sycamore trees or designated heritage trees. Remember, the sycamores are
Right,
protected here
sycamores
too.
are in there too, you're right.
Those things go up like matchsticks.
Okay, and we're gonna drop the affordable business. I mean, these
Yeah.
things could be affordable
By design, like you said earlier.
by
yes.
design, or somebody could choose to deed restrict them, I suppose.
Voluntary, we're batting 0 that have
Right.
done voluntary.
Well,
at this
if
point.
I were in the house building business, I wouldn't volunteer it either.
Yeah.
Makes it very difficult.
On page 5, I do like the, consider including part of the urgency ordinance. If Casitas Water declares stage 4 or 5, then SB 9 would be suspended until the severe drought is lifted.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's actually something that could hold up.
Yeah, I think
Now,
that's good.
granted, we're not really in that stage. I mean, if you're
No,
looking at
we're not.
Casitas, it's like 80% full right now, something
No,
like
but
that.
that's in the future, that could
Uh,
change.
But this is
It's
a
not
code.
why we make rules.
Yeah, this is a code that is meant to be and understand
Yeah.
the cyclical nature of well, Mother Nature.
Right, yeah, no, I think that's a good call, I like that.
I would be interested when you come back to see in general. We've gotten a lot of detail here on what SB 9 requires and what it bans, let's say. But how about the SMA? I'm trying to figure out, if somebody comes in and says, I want to do a lot split, and you say, well, here's this set of rules, and here's this set of rules. If the set of SB 9 rules, with local additions, whatever, becomes so onerous, even though objective, are we giving people a reasonable choice? So I'd be a little bit interested in, at a high level, what's the advantage of going with SB 9 other than you guys handle it and they never have to talk to us? Because the other,
That's a big
the
plus.
rest, because we're really unreasonable people. But what's the corresponding advantage of going the SMA route?
So you're asking for maybe like a PowerPoint page that has the SB 9
And SMA.
and
Yeah,
SMA.
Yeah,
And
and just,
here's this apple. Is this also an apple or is this an orange?
yeah.
Yeah, I think we can do the comparative piece to that. I think
it
it's
would-
fair because I would say most of the people that we've talked to have asked that question. Because they've said, well, why don't I just do a subdivision? Well, here's your requirements for the subdivision. Like, well, I don't like those requirements. I'm going to go back to this.
I don't like those either.
And then I don't like
so-
these either. And then we see him basically walking
Walking away,
Yeah.
yeah.
And look, sometimes what we're doing is we're providing information. We're not necessarily saying you shall do one or the other. We're
Sure.
providing them with,
Yeah.
here's your standards and process for this,
Here's your objective standards.
and here's your standards and process for this. And in this case, they may not even be able to do a lot split or multiple lot split because they don't meet the minimum requirements in terms of subdivision. So they immediately can't do this. So now we're looking at this piece. And that's the only other option they have.
Yeah.
Whereas before, when they said, hey, I want to do this, and it's like, you can't do this because you don't meet
And
the
that was
minimum.
the end of the conversation.
And that was the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
Now the state said, you have this option if you want. And most have said, that's not really an option for me. So then they go that route. which is fine, because you're still providing them with a process
Mhm.
and a choice.
Yep.
And if they choose neither, then that's still their choice.
Cool.
Okay.
Awesome.
Did we beat this horse to
I
death?
think we killed it.
Look, I think you've given us some good information
Yeah,
to,
I think we gave
to
enough
go
ammo.
back and,
For sure.
you know, Sarah and I will work on getting those pieces together.
I
I'm not gonna
like-
sit here and pretend it's gonna be the next meeting.
Yeah.
But we're gonna get it back as quick as we can.
Yeah, and overall, I like where your direction is and what you're, you know, how you're considering fire standards and you're considering water conservation and the things that are
Yes,
important to the community.
absolutely true, absolutely true.
But you've got it on here for March 6th.
Look, I'm living dangerously, okay?
He's shooting for the roof.
There could be a lot going on here, yeah. There was one more thing on page 4 of the staff report. It talks about SB 9 requires cities and counties to process urban lot splits ministerially. And it talks about an urbanized area or urban cluster designated by the Census Bureau. Does either of those terms apply to Ojai?
I think we're in an urban area.
Are we an urbanized area or are we an urban cluster? I know for some things, we've been lumped with Ventura and Oxnard,
Yeah. Yeah.
which, you know, it's a couple of big dogs and we're the flea on the end of the tail of one of them.
We are, I looked that up actually today, because I know, okay, so back in October, when we talked about the housing regulations, Alex said
We're classified as urban.
urbanized area, and we are. And what that means is through the United States Census Bureau, it's either 2,000 units, we're a minimum of either 2,000 units, or we have a population of at least 5,000. And that meets the
Okay,
definition
okay.
of.
I mean, it says right below, we are within an urbanized area. I just don't understand how we conclude that.
We concluded that by
Yeah.
that mathematical piece that
What you just gave us, very good.
Right on the,
Very
right on the
good.
edge.
Because I'll admit, after Alex said it in October, I was like, "Are you sure?" And he said, "No, we are." And I said, "Okay." And then today I looked at it and I was like, "We are."
Darn it. All right. I thought we were rural.
I think everybody perceives us as being rural.
We have a rural nature.
Sure. However, U.S. Census does not believe that's
know.
true.
We're
Too close to
we're-
these other cities.
We're suburban / rural.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Cool, okay.
that's
So
good. Thank you very much. And
we don't need to vote or make any direction. We just say, you guys do what you
We've just
do.
been-
and-
We've had a conversation, and that's enough of a direction.
Okay.
I think you've also identified what roads not to go down, so we'll make notes of those as well.
And by the way,
Parking
I
thing.
want to compliment Sarah on a well-researched, well-cited,
Good job.
and well-written report. This is not an easy one, and first out of the gate, in a little place like Ojai, it's got to be difficult, but thank you. You did a good job.
She's laid the path, for sure.
Yeah, we need the advanced planning help. It's good.
I'm looking forward to making some more changes to Title
Oh, Title
10.
10, yeah.
Ooh, boy. That's advanced planning,
Okay.
right?
I'd like
So-
to say you and me both, but that's not true.
Let's go on to item 4 then, future agenda items.
Yeah, so we are tracking. I've got Sarah Camelli, working on the tiny houses ordinance discussion. That's gonna be round 2. We have done quite a bit of research. We've reached out to some other jurisdictions, and we've found out some information. I don't want to spoil it. I'm not gonna be a spoiler. No spoiler alerts here. But some of that stuff is gonna be a bit eye-opening. Some of these are new regulations that we're just finding out about, which are gonna change some of the context of what we're looking at. But we're bringing it back again, and it's quite possible that it'll be a third round where we need to have that discussion as a round two before we come back with a draft ordinance.
Okay.
With that, there's also.
One question to that point.
Okay.
We have in the past had discussions about tiny houses. Excuse me. And we have had discussions about movable tiny houses. Which one are we talking about here? Or are we going to have a proposed ordinance that covers both?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's the movable versus, so it's the one on chassis versus the ones that are on foundation. Both of those can be perceived and understood and meeting the standards of what is a tiny house.
Okay. That makes sense to me to put it all together.
Yep, I agree.
And then,
Don't
the
slice the
housing
pizza too
element.
thin. So the housing element program discussion, I just want to let you know that we are meeting with the housing, hold on a second, the housing subcommittee
Yes.
with the planning commission. So we have that meeting this week, and we have Sarah Marshall that's working on the programs. And her and I have been working pretty closely. You've been here for 3 weeks? 5 weeks? Really, 5? Okay.
Wow.
Look, she's hit the ground running here, and we're working on some programs because we do have a pretty tight timeline to get some of this rezoning and these objective standards on the books. We agreed with HCD to get those things done first.
Okay.
So they are first on the docket, and
Sweet.
that's
Good.
what we're focusing on right now. So you probably see some of that, but I think also it's just identifying what we have done at this point that was kind of low-hanging fruit versus some of those big tasks that are coming up first. So, and that's going on for the 21st. March 6th, I have SB 9 revisions.
What was I thinking?
Maybe. I'm gonna put a question mark by
Yeah, I
that
was
one.
gonna say, maybe, that's a maybe, right?
That's a maybe. 1440, we're working through that one right now, and we have everything. There's nothing else to be added here at this point, so I think you can expect that one on the 6th. And 304 South Montgomery as well, which is one of the properties that's a part of the
Oh,
development agreement.
Two-story,
Or what was
here.
I'm sorry, what
unit.
was the development agreement and is now the settlement
That's
agreement.
separate.
I want to
Yeah.
clarify that. So,
Yeah, that's gonna come back as five separate
Yeah.
requests ultimately.
But not all
Well, hold
of them
on.
come to us.
I don't want to get into the details on it. It's not 5, it's 4, but only 3 are going to be before this body. Because
Okay.
1 has already taken place,
Mhm.
right? So you'll see 3 of them through the SB 330 process.
Okay, just a slight warning here, we are at the minimum number of people in seats here to have a quorum. If that persists, I live too close to some of that stuff, and I will have to recuse myself.
You do live, that's true. Okay, so we're going to have a conversation offline.
Just have to think about it.
Yeah.
Do more than
There's
that.
there's no way out of the recusal, so we need to be prepared for that.
Thank you. Moving on.
I'd rather,
pending items,
I'd
I know,
rather
I
have
need
a
to-
say, but I can't.
Okay, so pause that for a moment.
Well, hopefully we'll get a new commissioner.
On the 21st, do we have, is anybody going to be away on the 21st? Everybody going to be here? Okay.
I'll be here. Yeah. I'll be
March
here.
6th, aside from what Chair Quillisi had just said, is there anybody that's going to be away?
No.
Everybody's going to be here?
I think so.
Okay.
Be here.
Then we're in good shape. Because the item that you're speaking about
First is
is
fine.
further out.
Okay.
Okay.
March 6th is fine. Sure.
That's it for staff. Yeah, that's all I have.
Is there a requirement on the books in the code right now that newly constructed, as opposed to converted into an ADU from a garage or something, newly constructed dwelling units have to be on sewer in the city? Is that a rule or is it not?
I think we follow the state standard, and I remember there being something about attached versus detached as requiring it to be connected to sewer or to the.
I'm thinking about 1440 daily. That's a long way from anything right now.
Yeah, we're actually covering that in the staff report. So I don't want to go into the details on
Right.
that.
Fine. All right. Do we have a director's report? Anything else you want to add?
I think I already announced.
Probably tired of talking at this point.
I've been talking more. I think I already announced the two Sarahs that we have online now. You met Sarah Camelli at the last meeting, I believe. You've now met Sarah Marshall. We were super excited, and they are hitting the ground running, both of them. So,
I'm impressed so far.
and we are potentially bringing on a pro bono intern that we're in the final stages of.
Ooh,
So that
okay.
that ends up happening. That would be a well-rounded team at this point. So.
First time in a long
Gonna
time.
bring an intern for the summer or what?
Well, the idea is to test the waters, kick the tires.
When
and
this
then
person is not in school?
What's
or-
nice is this person is local. So they are out of the state right now, so they'll be doing virtual. We're gonna be giving them virtual assignments, but if it all works out, wouldn't mind having that continue into the summer,
Excellent.
so.
The more arms and legs and brains we can get around these things, the
Yeah, I
better.
can't announce names yet, only because it hasn't been confirmed with
Sure.
HR yet. So once that's confirmed, then I'll start saying some
Doesn't
names.
matter, yeah.
Correct.
Okay, commission member reports, anything to add?
I went to the last MAC meeting
Oh,
or so ago
good. Boy,
and reported on our,
what have we done
Bryant-
since the last MAC meeting?
yes, I have reported that we have met our housing, well, we are in the process of meeting our housing element numbers and
For RENA.
described
For RENA.
briefly what they were. And that was about it. They had a long meeting that was on something that was totally unrelated to the city, so
Very good. All right, and our city council liaison, member Whitman? You're not under a 3-minute time limit, by the way.
however,
I'm not starting the clock.
We'll really try to
We
keep
wouldn't
it
mind.
3
but-
minutes. Sarah, welcome. I'll share that it must have been more than 5 weeks ago. Lucas had a big smile on his face, and he said, "I had help coming." So, welcome to Ojai. Glad you're here. And my daughter graduated from UC Santa Cruz. My wife worked there for 3 years, and we ended up hobnobbing with the administration. And one of my favorite facts about UC Santa Cruz that I learned in that time is that other than MIT, UC Santa Cruz is the most cited school in scientific publications, which is pretty impressive.
That is very impressive.
Largely because they have this cancer database that everybody can freely utilize, whereas other universities choose to make them private and limited access. But it's very impressive.
Yeah, that's cool.
I am not the person who's going to be participating in the selection of your next commissioner, but I will get the message along that that needs to happen soon.
Awesome.
Let's see. And I guess the final thing is just to thank you guys for your service. We need commissioners. We need the participation of the public. We can't really function as a city without it. So I really appreciate that you guys are doing what you're doing, and hopefully we can get more enthusiasm from the community to serve on commissions. and especially people in, say, the 30 to 50-year-old range, because it's eventually going to be theirs.
He's not talking about us.
I'm not talking about sweeping anybody out, because I'm in that age range I excluded as well, but, you know, they're the people that are going to be
Affected.
inherited what, we, you know,
Need to
They're
be
gonna be
mentored to
taking
carry
over
on after us.
and be
Yes.
prepared to, you know, it used to be the place where people, you know, did their training to be an eventual city council member. And I think that's actually a good thing that, you know, we should try to encourage, that people get involved in government before they run for city council. And so, but thanks again for your.
You were here for a while.
I was on, I sat there for a couple of years, yes. And, you know, I learned a lot. A lot of what I learned then, you know, is being put into use now on city council. A couple of comments about things said tonight. Just really briefly, someone mentioned that the cities ought to be revolting against SB 9. And I would say that there are some that are, and they have joined together and are pursuing litigation about, you know, the concept of some local control should be retained. The other thing that I've learned is that, and this kind of came up in tonight's discussion, is that our housing laws are basically being adopted by the state representatives from 4 counties. Those 4 counties have a sufficient population and number of representatives that they don't really feel the need to, apparently don't feel the need to look at, you know, smaller counties and smaller populations. And so we get these one size fits all type of legislation that we then have to figure out, you know, how to adapt to, you know, a 7,500 resident population in a, you know, and rules that are designed for a city the size of, you know, $1 million or more, or 1 million population or more, with, you know, huge infrastructure and whatever, which we just, you know, don't have. But that, I used to just be frustrated by what was being imposed upon us. Now I kind of understand a little bit more about why. Doesn't make it better, but anyways, again, I really thank you guys for your service.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you as well. And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
All right, there being no other business obvious before the commission, it is 8:24 and we are adjourned.